we'll talk about all the things
Okay.
now that the recording is going. And then let me start bringing people in. And so it'll be great, Greg, because like I say, they can see us, we can't see them. There'll be like I'll do a little announcement on how it all works. And how do I bring everybody? How about like that? Perfect. Bringing everybody in. Welcome, welcome. We're getting started here shortly. Thanks for joining Greg's and my catch-up chat. That's really all this is. We've been wanting to talk for a while. We're overdue, and you all are joining us. Not from the cheap seats, from the very privileged seats of listening to us have a conversation about the state of the art in co-op entrepreneurship. And I see some repeat attendees, so you know what to do. Basically, you should see a little, I have to find it by Braille every single time. If you go to the lower nav bar, there's Amy. Hi, Amy. Somewhere, what happened to the Q&A? Huh. Well, this is different. Well, I may have gummed up something in the setup for this particular meeting.
Oh, I see. On the bottom right, there's like 9
meeting tools. Oh, they have changed the icon on me. That's what they have done. So it's now a little toolbar. Oh, thank you. And somebody put in a new. Thank you, Amy. So that's the Q&A bar interface. So you can put questions in there. And then we will see them. And otherwise, you can, emote to your heart's content using all the emojis. We like seeing emojis. We find it validating. And then we'll get going here shortly. So, Greg, in fact, we're just going to get going. People will wander in for a bit. It's been a minute, as we have established. So it's great to see you, my friend. And you are the last but not the least guest of this first season of mine, where I just catch up with friends who have been in the business of helping entrepreneurs make their businesses better. And you in particular have a very interesting, you're in a very interesting line of work, working as you do with co-ops. But tell people a little bit about your background, because I think you're one of the few people I know who are sort of lifelong cooperators. You were not quite raised at a co-op kindergarten, but almost.
No, well, that's interesting. Yeah, I was joking with you. I was out to dinner last night with some friends and a couple we didn't know, and I was trying to explain what I do, and it's always a little complicated. But yeah, now I explain that I'm a co-op Nepo baby. So
yes.
I guess the origin story is when I was growing up in Manchester, New Hampshire. My dad owned the local carpet store, and if you go way back, it was his dad's carpet store. His dad was actually a Ukrainian Russian Jewish immigrant that left because life was not good for the Jews back in those days in Russia and what is now Ukraine, and they moved to the region, and he really my grandfather, who I never met, really wanted to open a carpet store because he had worked in Sears, and Sears at the time had a floor covering department, and his dream was to open a store, right? And so he moved the family to Manchester, New Hampshire, opened a carpet store, and this person, my grandfather, passed away when my dad was 13, and so my dad really wanted to take over the family business, and didn't even want to go to college, and my grandmother made my dad go to college, and when he came back, she let him run the business. And so for years, that's what my dad did, is he just ran the family carpet store. And I remember when I was a kid, they sponsored our soccer team, which was very exciting. I remember we would stop by after work, and they had these huge carpet rolls in the back of the store, and I would run up and down the carpet rolls. That was like my favorite part of the store. But when I was about 12 or 13 years old, my dad started a co-op for carpet stores. And co-ops are one of these funny words that everyone's heard, but 90% of people, maybe more, can't really define. And I think typical to that, my dad didn't know what a co-op was. He just knew that he and many other friends of his who owned carpet stores were struggling to compete. It was before Home Depot and Lowe's, but they knew that there was bigger competition, and they knew that each of them was buying almost like a smaller store, and they knew that they had shared operational expenses, shared marketing challenges, and could there be some economy of scale of working together? And so they got together with 11 other friends, and I said, geez, there must be some benefit if we can, get better deals or save money or save time. And so they started researching different options. And someone said, well, you guys should go look at True Value hardware. And at the time, True Value hardware and Ace hardware were both cooperatively owned. So one had 4,000 stores, one had, I think, 5,000 or 6,000 stores. True Value is now actually, they sold themselves to private equity, interestingly enough. Ace Hardware is still a co-op owned by 4,000 stores. Anyway, my father and his business partner, a guy who ran another store in St. Louis, they said, this is what we want to do, right? Look at the scale they have, look at the buying power, look at the national brand. So they formed a co-op for carpet stores. And for years, that's what he did. And they grew to over 1,000 carpet stores around the US. And they buy, at this point, the group buys billions of dollars a year in floor covering. I believe they buy more than any other company in the country around floor covering. They buy more than Home Depot or Lowe's. The group's called Carpet One, and the larger group is now called CCA Global. So anyway, where I entered the picture is I graduated college myself, many years later, and I was living in Cambridge, Mass, and I worked at a local bike shop. And there was a consumer food co-op in Cambridge that we loved. And it was always hard for me to reconcile, like, what does my dad do with a co-op? And I put that in quotes with, the consumer food co-op, or like in college, there's like a housing co-op. I'm like, these things have nothing to do with each other. It doesn't make any sense. But, co-ops sound cool, right? Like that's what I knew. And that's what most people know. So anyway, I was talking to my dad one day about the challenges of the local bike store owner I was at. And he said, oh, is there a co-op in that industry? And I said, no, but you're going to have to explain to me more this whole co-op thing you do, because it doesn't make any sense with these other things I know of it. But that was the start of a 10-year journey where we started the nation's only purchasing co-op for independent bicycle stores. And, I don't know if you want to talk about sort of like the different kinds of co-ops, but I
think maybe to the extent to just say, like, there are these different kinds of co-ops, right? And sort of like carpet stores or bikes or hardware stores, or getting together sort of to form a purchasing conglomerate, right? That gets them a competitive price, but then the individual stores are still individually managed and owned and operated, right? Is pretty. It's a common one that people will know. If you have an Ace Hardware on your little main street, right? Chances are or a lot of people, I'm guessing, are members of things like REI, right?
Which is a consumer-owned co-op.
Which is a consumer-owned co-op, where I remember back, and I just like, nowadays I don't have my card anymore, but it's just all electronic, right? But I think I signed up. I arrived in the US 30 years ago in 1996. And I think that same year I joined REI in Berkeley. With my first purchase, they slapped on an extra $20 for my share, and that's it, right? And it's compelling.
It's an easy win. I can kind of fill in the rest of my story, but like, I think we should come back to the REI example, because it's interesting how these, like, what REI does as a co-op versus what like a purchasing co-op does versus a worker co-op. These levels of governance you and I were kind of shouldn't have crap about a little bit earlier, I think would be interesting. But maybe just to like fill in the rest of my story. So there are consumer co-ops, there's worker co-ops, you can have small business owned co-ops like an Ace Hardware or Carpet One. And then if you go up to the top of the supply chain, there's huge farmer owned cooperatives, right? Like Land O'Lakes, Organic Valley, Ocean Spray, Blue Diamond Almonds. Most of the dairy and citrus in America is owned by these huge co-ops owned by farmers. So anyway, so I didn't understand all that. So for 10 years, I ran this purchasing co-op for bicycle stores. I frankly had no right to be doing it. I was very much like, hey, Howard's kid is interested in a bike store co-op. So we formed a co-op based on that model. But I learned a lot. And we got the group up to about 250 bike stores around the US. And then I left and worked for a tech startup, and I kind of got interested in like what the tech community was really good at was like lean startup and agile and all these like really innovative things. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. I like the lean thing. I like the cooperative values, right? Like the tech community doesn't always have like great values, especially now. But how would you combine like sort of lean startup and cooperative values? That got really interesting to me. And then I fell back into purchasing co-op. Someone asked me to help start a purchasing co-op of craft brewery owners, believe it or not, which was like the best job I ever had because every meeting you could drink beer. Like you would go to, they'd be like, hey, you want to have a beer? And so I didn't really drink a lot of beer at the time, but it got me into beer. And then coming out of that, I was like, oh, geez, like here's all the things I could have done better when I started the bike cooperative that I didn't know about. Because when you get to do it a second time, you like learn so much more. But I was also just like aware, like, I'm like, man, like these folks didn't know the right person to go to get going.
Yeah.
There needs to be more resources. And there are kind of like regional co-op developers. There's some very good ones through a website called the Cooperation Works Network that I'll give a shout out to. But it tends to be very like one at a time. And so my dad, who is still like super involved in the cooperative development and is right now starting a global platform for co-ops to use AI, believe it or not, at 81. He and I still talk a lot about co-ops. And so about 8 years ago, right around the birth of my first kid, who's now 8, he and I were talking about this problem of why there weren't more cooperatives. And he said, you know what we need? We just need like an incubator or accelerator program. And since I had time in the tech community, I was like, yeah, that makes, it was just like, yes, let's do that. And so when I finished up the beer contract, I was like, let me just try it. And that's really how we kind of came up with the idea for the first Start.Coop program is let's try to find a group of the most, let's see if we can put together like a cohort rather than doing one at a time. What would it look like to find that 9 to 12 founders in the US each year who are like, have the best vision for cooperative scale and to support them, right? Support them through my time, our mentors' time, but also how do they support each other? And so that's really what the program's been about.
And I think that's right around when we met, right? Because we had started Zeros Unite. I think were we part of the first cohort or second cohort? Second, like really early on. So I'm a co-founder of Zeros Unite, as some folks on this call know. And our co-founder, Mara Zepeda, I think, attended the cohort, and we learned so much from you all. And it was still very, very hard. I think the other thing and we'll get into that in a minute. I think the other thing I would say is at around that time when we started thinking about Zeros Unite, I want to pick up on this point you made about the tech industry, right? So I like the idea of sort of lean and agile, and I think you ended up creating a lean co-op canvas, right? Isn't there a lean co-op business canvas? So I love the methodology. And then the collision with the tech world, I would say, is we saw people beginning to build tech cooperatives, right? And so Drivers Co-op out of New York is an example where people say correctly, right? Like all of these platforms could in fact be co-ops. All these social platforms, like Facebook could be a massive consumer co-op. It's not, right? And the thing that intrigues me about that is like the versatility of the co-op model, which you've talked about in your personal experience, but also the experimentation we see with people creating things like basically recreating Silicon Valley style businesses, but as cooperatives, where the people who are creating value on those platforms participate in any financial upside. And I was so struck by something, I think it's, what's his name, Jaron Lanier, I think is his last name, who's a Microsoft futurist and researcher, talked about a few years ago where he said something like, if we participated, if we could actually just participate directly in the value that we create for platforms like Facebook, right? Because we're the product, our attention is the product. The average American family would receive a $25,000 check every year. And that was almost 10 years ago that he wrote that. And it's only gone up, right? And it's going to continue to go up with AI, but the platforms are not designed to actually just share value in this way. And that's where people have started building things that, in fact, they call platform co-ops, which is just so intriguing to me, just the versatility of the model.
Yes, it is. There's so many things we could talk about there. Yeah, the versatility of the model, platform co-ops. But I want to go back to sort of the wealth extraction point, sort of the why this matters. Yeah, I mean, look, if you look at platforms, if you look at the way that private equity is buying up, dentist office and, barbershops and beauty salons and plumbing supply businesses. I mean, the entire economy is consolidating ownership, right? Like there's a lot of good data coming out about how, there's earners and there's owners, right? And it used to be that, like, if you had a steady income, you could buy a home and you could move up, and sort of this American dream of economic mobility. But the reality is the reason the wealth gap is growing overall is because the people who already own stuff now, and when I say own stuff, houses are part of that, public stock market is part of that, but also, private funds, private companies. The majority of the new wealth is in the ownership. Right. Wages relative to GDP are more flat, right? And so the people who already have money because they sold a company, they own shares in something, they are recycling that wealth into new ventures, right? And so as ownership kind of consolidates, the profits consolidate, and the two, the earners versus the owners continue to diverge. And so we're going to keep seeing that. And so I think the platforms you're talking about are the most visible example of that, but it's across the entire economy. And so this question of how might you distribute ownership more broadly, your question of, could we, whether it's a dentist office or a platform co-op, how do you get the people who are putting the work in to have a bigger share of the profits? That's at the heart of it, for sure.
Yeah, and let's get into that, right? So there's actually a question from the audience. Can't every business be a co-op? Yes, right? It's a corporation. It's a corporation owned and managed by members, be they workers, producers, consumers. And so, yeah, and I think that's the ground we have just covered. But let's get into the specifics. So you want to start a co-op, right? Things go bump almost immediately. At least in my experience. And so talk a little bit about, I mean, you run a program and you want to help co-op entrepreneurs succeed. Talk a little bit about, well, it's easy to say any business could be a co-op. Talk about some of the sort of trials and tribulations of that, or the good, the bad, and the ugly. Yes, absolutely, 100%. And what happens?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, any new business, 70 to 80% of new businesses fail, right? That's just like the data writ large in American society. Okay. And, and I think there's a narrative that, like, there's so many successful startups. The reality is, like, there's a handful of big startups we see that are primarily venture capital backed. It's less than 2% of companies that get VC funding. A very small percentage of those are really successful. So it's hard to start any new company. It's certainly hard to start any new company without real funding. And then if you add this idea of, like, we're going to innovate a business model and an ownership model at the same time, that's when things get complicated, right? Because Ashford, if you and I tomorrow are we're going to start a new platform that's going to compete with Facebook, okay, it's going to be really freaking hard, right? Now, if you also say we're going to start a new platform that's going to compete with Facebook that's worker owned or consumer owned or tech provider owned, well, that makes it even harder, right? Because now there's some governance decisions to figure out. But I think the core thing is, can you get the business up and running? Can you, if you need outside financing, can you get that? And then how does governance layer into that? It just adds more complexity to it. I don't think it's insurmountable, right? And, like, I think to the question, it can happen across any kind of supply chain, any level of the economy, any sector. People will ask me all the time, like, what sectors is a co-op good in? I'm like, well, you got housing co-ops, you got food co-ops. The largest network of how people wire money in Europe, the SWIFT financial network, is a co-op. So there's not a sector I can think of where there hasn't been a form of cooperative. So the potential is unlimited, and that's what makes the model exciting. but it also doesn't make it easy to pull off, right? And so what we see historically is that the majority of big co-ops today got going at a time when the economy was maybe a little less sophisticated, and the competition was less consolidated. And so it's very hard to compete against these behemoths in any category. And then if you also say we're not going to have that sort of money to compete, it makes it very hard. So finding that like traction and getting to break even is a real issue. And I also just want to say, sometimes we will meet people who will say, well, I'm part of a restaurant or a business that, you know, it's not making money, it's failing. We want to turn it into a co-op, right? And that's like such a trap, and I think speaks to the problem of this word cooperative is, you know, it doesn't really matter what kind of entity you're talking about, whether it's a nonprofit, a for-profit, a for-profit co-op. If the business is upside down, if you're losing money and you can't pay your staff, like,
yeah, it's not going to help to turn it into a co-op. But
no, now you're just sharing the losses of more people, right? Like,
right.
Like, hey, do you want to buy, like, Asher, go back to your REI analogy. Do you want to pay $20 to buy into business that's losing money? No, I don't think I do, right? So
right, yeah, let's put a pin in that for a minute, right? Like the conversions of existing businesses into co-ops, but and let's stay with the startup moment for a bit longer, because I am just curious, like, what have you seen across your experience and across the accelerator that you run at Start.Coop? What are some sort of key ingredients, if you will, for a baby co-op to succeed?
Yeah, well, you need a business model and an ownership model, right? So I said that, but like, I think, you know, people conflate the two of co-ops all the time, right? So how does the business generate revenue? You know, is there a real financial model to support that? I know that's not sexy to talk about, you know, for those of us on the left of the economy, you know, we want to think that all this is totally divorced from economics and financials, but you need to be able to do both. You need someone who can kind of operate with both sides of their mind. So what we tell founders is that, you know, we can help a good founder become great. We can't help a bad founder become good. You know, we can't take someone with a business model that's not going to work and help them get over the hump. But if they have the potential of something great, and maybe some examples might be helpful. You know, we had, you know, since you mentioned the Drivers Club in New York City, you know, that's one of our more high profile grads. And, you know, we had a bunch of founders with this crazy idea of we want to compete against Uber and Lyft, right? Which is the hardest one possible. But New York is such a market onto itself that, you know, we were like, well, it could work, you know, if you have the right financing and if you get to the critical mass, it could work. And these platform co-ops are very interesting because you do kind of need a certain critical mass to get going, right? Like, if you contrast that with, let's say there was a 3-person consulting firm, you know, the critical mass is much smaller, but to get to sort of the network effect of like, we need an X amount of drivers and X amount of passengers to even get this thing there. The economics are really different. But, you know, each of them are kind of like their own things. Like, does it survive as an entity in the markets it's in? You know, is a really interesting question.
Yeah, you know, so I've learned some of these things the hard way myself, right? So if I had to do Zebras Unite over again, I would probably follow the advice that I'm now giving people that I consult with, where the co-op may ultimately be the right structure and governance model for you, but you in fact need to start there, right?
Yes.
Like your 3-person consulting firm, incorporating as a co-op, working through the governance, all of that is going to cost you money because, among other things, there's a very, very small number of lawyers that you can even hire to help you with that, right? So you're spending money up front that you're not really making yet. And in the meantime, like, you could be an LLC partnership and you could capture the way of cooperating as part of your operating agreement. You don't have to go to structure immediately. You can actually focus on learning how to literally cooperate, emphasis on operate together, right? And do that in a much more cost-efficient structure. Because you're not like, I mean, you know, LLC partnerships are a dime a dozen. I mean, I'm in the process of standing one up with some colleagues, and it's like you literally these days you can just run it through AI. There is so much legal context out there. You can actually get to a very practicable operating agreement without spending $1. But let me tell you how, I mean, we spent in the 5 figures trying to sort all that out as a startup cost, you know, with Zebras Unite. And so that's where I'm increasingly landing is like, well, could this be something smaller? If you have less than 100 members at startup, you can be an LLC, right? If you have fewer than 99 people, it could just function as an LLC. And the second thing that I've observed is entrepreneurs tend to underestimate the culture building, like the work of building culture as a co-op. And learning how to co-op, unless you've, I mean, unless you're a co-op Nepo baby like yourself, you know, most of us, I mean, and I'm from Europe, so I've been somewhat exposed to co-ops, you know, because my bank at home in Germany and my grocery store were all known as co-ops. But that doesn't mean that I would know how to exist in that as a business environment. Well, and I think that's because I think that's another premium that you pay as a co-op startup is building the co-op culture internally.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, you're naming such an important point that founders tend to over rotate to the governance, that it's so tempting because people have had such toxic experiences in capitalism to say, we're going to have this perfect structure that's going to decide everything and resolve everything. And you're right, it can get very expensive. Like, I do want to say, and I need to be careful because, you know, we get in trouble with lawyers when we say that, but you know, we've been spending a lot of time to simplify the bylaws and the incorporation docs. And there are a lot of co-ops that you can be a co-op as an LLC. You can be a co-op as a corporation. You don't have to be incorporated as some fancy co-op, depending on the state you're in. And you know, and we can talk about offline. We've been trying to ease that and reduce that. But the more important thing you're saying is that you need to balance these two things, what we call structure and culture, right? So the analogy we use here is like, if you think of a house, okay, in your basement, you know, you got, you know, the plumbing and the HVAC and the electrical, right? And you got some systems, and yeah, you need some basic structure to get going. And we can have the debate of, you know, can you do that as an LLC, do that as a Colorado Limited Cooperative Association, do it as a corporation? We've seen all of them, and all of them can work. There are plenty of co-ops that we would call a co-op that are just LLCs, okay? The culture, you know, you can do it either way. But you don't go into the plumbing every day to change the temperature in your house, okay?
No.
You don't go into the basement every day to change the you know, to adjust turning on the water, right? So that's where we talk about the culture, where you live every day. And I think this is what you're saying is like, you can develop that practice of how do we build trust? How do we build community? And what is the right level of decision-making? Not everyone needs to be deciding everything in the company. But you know, there's a nice quote phrase, like, we're going to move at the speed of trust, right? So how do you move forward with some inclusion and putting the members at the heart of the organization? To me is the core thing. And I would say the biggest thing I learned from my father is like, the members need to be at the heart of it, but also recognizing that they don't want to decide everything. So I was sharing with you earlier that one of my favorite analogies, because I don't have a better one, is, you know, I think when people think of a co-op, they think of, well, the members need to decide everything, right? And when you were, you know, when you were at REI, they're not asking you what merchandise should we put on this display table. They're not asking you what kind of sign to put up. They're not asking how to reinvest the profits in the company, right? They're asking you to buy things as a consumer and vote on the board. Now, there's a lot of critiques of REI that maybe they don't do enough. So I'm using them as sort of the most extreme example of like limited cooperative governance. But on the other end is like, we're asking everyone to do everything. And if you had a waiter that came to your table and said, you know, well, you know, what would you guys like for dinner? I don't know. I'm just a waiter. It's a co-op. Everyone decides everything. Okay, great. You want the steak? Do you want to come into the kitchen and cook the steak with us? Right? Like, and there's a difference between, the reason I'm going there is there's a difference in people giving input and people doing all the work, right? People want their voices to be heard, but it doesn't mean they're doing everything. And so as a leader, and this is like the hardest thing for me to teach, and I struggle with it, is like finding the inflection points of like, this is what people care about. Yes, we need to gather their input, and then we need to go back to them with options. That is very different than they need to be involved at every step in the decision.
Right.
And that might like sound like a subtlety, but that's why I sort of use the waiter analogy, is like, what you want the good waiter to do is come back to you and say, well, actually, we don't have the steak. I know you wanted it.
Yeah.
Chicken or fish, you know, which of those work? And here's
you also, I mean, I honestly, I always want the waiter to make recommendations.
Yes.
Because the menu is overwhelming, right? And these days I get a little bit nervous when I go to a farm to table restaurant. The other day I was like, what are all these other things on the side? Oh, those are the farms we source from. It's like,
yes,
too much information. But that's, I think, but finding, like, dialing that in, like that, calibrating that as the co-op entrepreneur, the co-op founders, I think people struggle with mightily, right?
People struggle with it. And I've been trying to write a module on it, and I haven't figured it out, you know, but in my head, it's called like facilitative leadership, but it's how do you make it easy for the members, right? But it's involving them in that right level, but people really do struggle with it. And again, like, we love worker co-ops. We do work with a lot of them, but worker co-ops, it's the hardest to, because the word co-op, people are like, oh, you know, but like another way to think about it is even in some well-known worker co-ops, and Asher, please tell me if I'm spending too much time on this, but I think it is such a juicy topic. You know, Equal Exchange is a 120 person well-known coffee, chocolate, and tea company here in Massachusetts, where I am. You sell in Whole Foods. They're beautiful, great chocolate. Even with them, very deep democratic governance, they have an org chart. Right?
Yeah.
There's a CEO, there's vice presidents, there's managers, there's floor employees, right? Now, every single one of those, so, you know, it's not, everyone's not deciding everything. There's departments just like a normal company. All of those employees can buy into ownership, right? The majority of employees are owners. And so when they have quarterly meetings, you know, all the member owners can go, right? When they vote for a board, the employee owners can vote for the board, they can run for the board. So the leadership reports to the employee owners, and that's how they build in the accountability of governance, but they can still function like a regular managerial team. And I think that split is really important, is like sort of ownership and accountability versus like day-to-day operations.
Yeah, 100%. And getting that right, you know, like in the moment of sort of conception of how you're trying to build something new. And that's where I'm hoping people will sort of find you more frequently to work out those kinks, because I think it's really hard. And there was a question in the registration about, you know, DAOs, distributed autonomous organizations. And we can talk about that. Successful implementation might work across countries and jurisdictions, although there's an asterisk to that. I actually think it's a more technological way to organize the day-to-day, but it doesn't actually solve for any of the problems we just discussed, right? You still have to have structure and the culture and a structured process, right? You still need a culture, and you know, everybody voting on everything all the time, even if it's technologically mediated, also gets exhausting, right? And those DAOs can sometimes over-index towards the most active members.
Yeah, I think the art is, you know, regardless of the structure, okay, like, yes, a good structure helps a lot, but I think the art is, as a leader, is bringing the significant or meaningful things back to your community, and having the forethought, like being connected into your community enough to be aware of those things, and then how you frame those decision points back up to the community matter a lot, right? So it's kind of like a feedback cycle you're doing with them. We were really excited about DAOs for a few years, and people were like, oh, this is going to solve everything, right? It's a different form of the governance debate you and I were having, is, you know, DAOs are going to solve all this stuff, but you still need those cultural pieces we're talking about of how do you build trust and good leaders at the heart of the DAO. And I'd say another one of the myths we see is that somehow you don't need a leader at the top of the DAO or the leader at the top of the co-op, because, and like, this is sort of like the dream of the left, right? Is if we just have somehow the right structure, we don't need good leaders. And in my experience, it doesn't happen. Is you still need people to kind of like guide the ship and coordinate those conversations.
Yeah, it doesn't get you out of the cultural question and the practice, right? Like I think if anything, the technology layer might introduce another obstacle to people learning how to be effective in a co-op of this nature. I also just to take on that second point for a minute, I also don't think DAOs function sort of extra jurisdictionally quite the way people imagine. I mean, they do if you're happy to just be in crypto space and and only get paid in some cryptocurrency. But in my experience, DAOs, if you want to interact with the current economy that we have, need to be tethered to a current economy structure of some kind, right? And there's some, if memory serves, there's some states that have more DAO-friendly corporate laws, like I think in Missouri and the Marshall Islands, you can actually form an LLC that functions as a DAO. Sort of, but what's your take on that?
I think DAOs are really interesting. I think, I haven't seen, I mean, I think we're always open to ways that technology can improve this stuff. I'm going to pan out a little bit, to me, it's the analogy I use is, if we all decide we wanted to drive to California, well, you're on the West Coast, I'm on the East Coast. This is a better analogy for me, but like, there's a lot of different vehicles that you can get you there, right? You can have a DAO, you can have a state incorporated co-op, you can have an LLC, you can have a corporation, you can have a nonprofit. And the reality is, if what you care about is some form of community decision-making or governance, there's a lot of different ways to get there, right? It's like saying, well, what do you think about the air conditioning in a Ford Taurus versus a Chevy Camaro? Like, they can all have air conditioning, so how you apply, and there's going to be some differences if you're driving in a pickup versus a SUV versus a coupe. Yes, there are differences, but I don't think that, I think the culture of what you're doing in that vehicle still matters a lot. And so I know I'm punting a little bit, but I'm like, you can actually execute some form of community involvement in any of these, and I don't think any of them is like the perfect solution.
Yeah. No, I think that's a key insight, right? It's not about the vehicle, it's about the people who are driving together, right?
Yeah.
And you have that asshole who doesn't want to stop, and then everybody else is like dying for the next bio break and the next cup of coffee, right? Yeah, so I think that's we're not going to get away from that. Let's pivot a minute. Well, before we go there, I have a favorite new sort of pet peeve is, now I'm hearing about people who want to create perpetual purpose trusts from the get-go, because that movement has become more vocal and is garnering more attention. And all I can say is like, no, please don't. It's just gonna explode your startup costs. Do you see a lean way to do a perpetual purpose trust anywhere in your?
There might be lean ways to do. So we're doing this new work I mentioned to you. We've been piloting in Colorado, where to help existing businesses convert to different forms of worker ownership. And generally the trusts, and again, I'm not a lawyer, so please consult with lawyers. We're happy to connect you to ones that we like. But usually the trusts are for an existing business owner that is successful, the business is profitable, and they're looking to exit out of it, and they're like, I want to kind of make sure this thing lasts for the next several generations in a way that is ongoing. And that's usually the best form of a trust, based on the people we've talked to in that movement. I just talked to folks at Common Trust yesterday, actually. So I don't see it making a lot of sense on day one. I think where you were going earlier, Ashford, of like, in the beginning, your job is to put in like sort of a minimum viable governance and get the business going and get the culture going. And then you can figure this stuff out later on. Like, yes, you're right. You can get sucked into like so much legal and so much structure that it can kind of drown you and just take all your energy and all your money. And I don't think that's a good thing for anyone. It doesn't make sense to me as a startup to do a trust.
Yeah, I haven't seen a good use case for it. I was just surprised to hear, even to just see some chatter today on LinkedIn. I'm like, oh, that does not sound like a good idea. But there's a lot of interest in academia and in legal circles, and I get it, right? Because that it's exciting and it's a research frontier.
Yeah.
But from an entrepreneurial perspective, I'm like, man, just stick to your knitting and figure out like what is it you're actually selling?
Yes.
And how do you meaningfully involve your community of, you know, partners and buyers and workers and whatnot, and begin modeling that, right? Like the analogy I like to use is, it's like if I decide tomorrow to run a marathon, right? Like I may be reasonably fit, and nobody in their right mind should just show up to the start line of the Boston Marathon and run it, right? You can form the intent to run a marathon or to build a co-op, right? But you need to, or to operate as a co-op, but you need to put in the time to practice and build up your mileage.
Yes.
And then again, from my experience, like, well, it's easy enough to flip an LLC or a C Corp or a public benefit corp into a co-op down the line.
Or just stay in that entity and update the bylaws of the operating agreement. Like you don't
that part.
Change the entity structure.
Yeah. So we're successfully
absolutely. I mean, most of the co-ops we deal with, and I just want to say, I know you guys did a state-specific cooperative. Most of the co-ops we deal with are corporations or LLCs. Right. They happen to have cooperative operating agreement, cooperative bylaws, but that's in the weeds. But yeah, I mean, I'll share, you know, I learned a lot from my dad, and he's still creating new amazing stuff at 81. He's creating this thing called the Principle 6 Cooperative right now, which is this crazy AI platform for co-ops. But one of the most useful things he told me when I was like 25 in the beginning of the bike co-op was I was stressing out because I'm like, I don't know how all this stuff is going to work out. We got all these complicated things we want to do. And he said, look, you know, it's like you're in a maze, right? And you know where you are and you know where you want to be at the end. But all you can see in this moment is like, do I take a left turn here or a right turn here? And he said, if you try to map out the entire thing, you're going to, first of all, drive yourself crazy. But secondly, you're going to over-engineer it because you don't have the data of actually what's around the corner. And to me, that speaks to the analogy you're saying is like, if you try to build out everything, right, then it is going to feel like a marathon because you're over-anticipating, here's the next 22 steps, when the reality is you kind of got to get around the corner and then you learn a little bit more. And then you get around the corner, you see a little bit more, and you kind of make decisions iteratively, which I know is not as satisfying, but it's just sort of how these things unfold in the real world, you know?
Right. Yeah. No, 100%. I think I wanted to talk to your dad about this Principle 6 cooperative.
Yeah, he's, believe it or not, he's in there's some group of G20 for co-ops. So right now he's presenting to India and Belgium with like the cooperative leaders. So they're able to get sort of people across co-ops using AI, but a secure AI where the member data is all protected. So that
that's the part I would love to talk to him more about, because that comes up in my tech company. We were talking earlier about how I'm a sort of holding company of one, Armillaria being the tech venture that I co-founded for systems change. Well, we take exactly that position, right? Like data needs to be sovereign, as does agency, and it needs to be protected. From sort of the rapacious Silicon Valley model, including the big AI companies. And I think there may be a natural affinity here between what we're building towards, which is a collective infrastructure for the impact sector writ large, that arguably itself should function as a co-op of aligned tech companies.
Totally.
And then what it sounds like your dad is building.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm biased, but you know, Principle 6 is trying to be that. And I'll say, you know, one of the more amazing conversations I've had in the last few years is because of Howard's interest in this and trying to do it through cooperative ownership, not owned by him, but through the community. He got to present to Mondragón recently, and Mondragón, I think, you know, you've talked in your past stuff, you know, they're the world's largest worker co-op. So Mondragón has this new think tank arm they spun up called Asset, which I didn't know about. And so Asset wants to do this. They're doing these international conferences on things like worker ownership and cooperative governance. So they want to use this sort of cooperative AI to help gather ideas from all these different groups. So it's really interesting.
I definitely want to talk to him, because it's, I mean, we're not yet a co-op ourselves, but the idea is like, so we would bring a tech company to this co-op that it wants to build tech, right? And so my question is, are there already tech companies in it? Because anyway, we can take that offline, but that'd be fascinating to explore, because it just occurs to me that is actually exactly a use case for the infrastructure that we imagine. And that's finally beginning to get some interest from funders who say, oh yeah, that's right. Technology should maybe not be left to the Silicon Valley bros any longer, because
I mean, talk about wealth extraction, right? Like people are talking
Yeah.
about the next wave of philanthropy, but it's because so much additional wealth is going to be extracted from the economy into these AI systems.
It's a huge enclosure of the commons, and now we get to sit there and wait for the largesse of the people who have ripped off our IP and our come on, give me a break. They need to be taxed. I'm with Bernie on that.
Yeah.
But let's talk about speaking about like how we right size the economy. So let's talk a little bit about exit to co-op, or exit into sort of the other side of the entrepreneurial journey. And what are you seeing there? What do you find exciting about? I mean, I think it's a fascinating, the whole silver tsunami, right? So the entrepreneurship through acquisition.
Yes.
But it could also be cooperatives through acquisition, right? Essentially buying from the current owners and flipping it into a multi-stakeholder or worker co-op.
Yeah, I think it's great. We try to think about that. You need solutions for every stage, right? It's a false choice to say it should just be about startups or just about exits. You need to give people more inclusive options. I think most people, not everyone, but I think most people are looking to do the right thing. And by that, I mean, there's some people that are just about pure wealth extraction and just about making as much money as possible. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of the culture is these days. But there's a lot of good people that, if given the choice, would rather pay their workers more, rather leave more to the community. And so we had not done anything about existing businesses converting over the first 6.5 years of our program, because frankly, it wasn't my background, and there's a lot of good players in the space doing this kind of conversion to community or conversion worker ownership space. But we would get calls from people saying, I'm an existing business owner and I don't know if I should be a ESOP, a perpetual purchase trust, an employee ownership trust, a co-op, sometimes people say I could be a B Corp, right? They don't know what all these things mean. And so there's a lot of channel confusion.
Oh, so much.
That really slow people down and add friction. And so we started this program in Colorado, this legacy exit cohorts, to really just help people navigate it. So the thing I like about the cohort model is, sometimes just being alongside other people trying to figure it out is what people need. When we started the program, I thought that it was going to be all about our curriculum, and that somehow I was going to have all these smart insights that were going to help people. And occasionally we do, but over and over what we hear is being alongside other people figuring it out is actually the most valuable thing. And so now, we just closed our second cohort. The whole thing's been a pilot. And so we have 9 business owners in Colorado, and one had 60 employees, one had 4 employees, one had 25 employees, one's in plumbing, one's in after school programming, all different categories. And what's been cool about it is just helping people navigate those options. And so one of the things we learned in doing the research was that, first of all, there was all this confusion going on. But secondly, that a lot of people didn't want to be a co-op because of the confusion around the word, right? Is it a dozen co-op? Does it mean that everyone's deciding everything? You have a lot of small business owners that are like, I've got a part-time employee. I don't want them figuring out the budget, right? They think that everyone's deciding the whole model. So, and they were like, oh, I'd be open to an ESOP, but they didn't know what an ESOP meant. So we just give them space to kind of figure it out. So we bring in co-ops, employee ownership trusts, ESOPs, alternative equity structures, and we just give them space to talk to each other, to kind of do these live case studies to help navigate it. And it's been a really fun model for us. And so out of the 9 in this second cohort, we've got 2 that definitely want to be co-op, 2 really big ones that definitely want to be an ESOP because of the tax perks, 1 that definitely wants to be an alternative equity structure, and a few that are deciding between a co-op and an employee ownership trust. And so it's been fun for us to kind of, I mean, in my heart, I'm always going to be a co-op person, kind of give people space to navigate to other options, because going back to my vehicle analogy, it's not one size fits all, and sort of helping people find a solution is really,
more power to you, Greg. I get so frustrated with all the overly specific, oh, it should be a perpetual ownership trust. Oh, it's called steward ownership. No, it's employee ownership. Like, enough.
Really
you're confusing the entrepreneurs. You're confusing the people who are in the position to transition their existing businesses into a new structure that has that democratizing, wealth building effect. But by asking them to buy into this, you're very philosophically pure construct, you're actually alienating them. Like, we're watching this thing play out right here in Portland, Oregon. That is so fascinating. So we had this very beloved outdoor equipment store, locally owned, founded however many decades ago by these two guys that are ready, Brian and Deke, who are ready to retire. Yep. Next adventure, right? About a year ago, big announcement. We're going out of business. We're tired. We want to retire. Everything must go sail. And the entire community arced up. It's like, oh my God, next adventure. We're losing them. What's going on? So then a buyer group presented itself and said, we want to take this off you, but keep the brand, keep it all. And then transition it to employee ownership or what have you. Well, come up to find out. So then, yay, next adventure will live, and now it'll live in this bit way. So then they started stocking up again. It was very dramatic, like literally going from out of business sale to, oh, we're stocking up again, we're back, to now, like literally days ago, oh, that deal fell through. But guess what? Brian and Deke are like, no, we're holding on to the ownership. We realize how important we are to the community, and we want to figure out an exit on our terms. So I'm like, can we just please get them into your into your cohort?
Yeah, no, I mean, we want to bring it to more communities for sure.
But see, that's the thing. Like, to me, that is a perfect example of business owners who just don't know what their options actually are. Yes. So they did the thing. It's just like, oh, we're just selling it. We're done. We're shutting it all down. But didn't have enough, like, didn't know where to look. And that's, I think, a big lost opportunity at the moment to just make it easier to find these alternative exits.
Yes, I think that's right. So a few things is, we had a germ of an idea that maybe this would resonate with people. And I think a few things are working with it is, one is model neutrality, right? Mm-hmm. That, the ESOP people are pushing ESOPs, us co-op people are pushing co-ops, the trust people are pushing trust, and so everyone's kind of got their little bias and their little marketing language on their website saying, this is the only one, is the only pure one. No, there's a lot of good ways to kind of support the community. All of them are better than private equity, right? So let's not kill ourselves with purity here. I think the other thing that matters a lot is when you're talking about the exit to community or exit to worker ownership, whatever you want to call that, is business owners don't want to go to their community to announce a sale or a closure or whatever it is until they have everything buttoned up and figured out themselves. Okay. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of reasons for that. There's ego around it, but on a more practical basis, their employees are going to freak out. Their vendors are going to freak out. Their customers are going to freak out. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is you kind of hold on to it and you're nervous about revealing this thing. And so what we see is that they find like one advisor and a lawyer, maybe a broker, and that's the only people who know, their partner knows, but until all that is done, they don't reveal it to the public, okay, for all the reasons I said. And so what we're trying to do in these cohorts, and we're still learning about what sectors and regions to bring it to and how to make it better, is just also giving people confidential space with other business owners who are thinking about it to navigate that. And it may sound kind of soft and fluffy, but just like giving people the emotional space, with the business in your community to say, here's what I'm worried about. How do I balance kind of passing on more money to my kids versus the legacy in my community versus what my employees want versus what my partner wants? They need space to navigate that with other owners that frankly are not in their backyard because they need like a safe space to talk about it.
Yeah. No, I hear that, and I love that. So yes, you should do that, please. Model neutrality. Yeah, and I think actually the legacy, like talking about it as in terms of legacy, is sort of the right tone as well, right? Like there are options to think about your legacy, and here are all these pathways, and so you avoid that sort of ideological divide, right?
Right.
which I think we, again, on the left, we sort of ignored our perils. Like, you got to be welcoming. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And you can't be too prescriptive, right? That's what we
No,
try.
that's the part, right? And you can't make it too hard to figure it out.
Yes.
All
Right.
those things.
Yes.
There are a couple of more questions I see.
Oh yeah, let's go to the questions.
One is community interest companies in the UK. Is an interesting way to protect an asset. They're called asset locked, right? And they can hand those over to other asset locked organizations, whether they're for-profit or non-profit. I'm not aware that that's a common structure.
I'm not familiar with it. No, I mean there's a lot more institutionalized stuff around employee ownership trust in the UK than
yeah. I think in the US the way you can handle that sort of is with these, trust structures, or with like at Zebras Unite we had a golden share that was held by a nonprofit. That had essentially a veto power in a very small set of circumstances, and of course you can move assets easily between nonprofits. But yeah, that's not a common sort of native organizational format that I'm aware of.
I'm not super familiar with I am familiar with a structure in the UK called community shares, which is another way of sort of doing community investment.
Mm-hmm.
Tax perks. So every jurisdiction has its own little perks, I think the UK is good on some of this community ownership stuff. The US has certain benefits around ESOPs, not around employee ownership trusts. Mm-hmm. Canada wants more of our ESOP laws. So, there's some, but it's some of it just comes down to sort of tax incentives and, but yeah, I mean, different jurisdictions, and that is the work of a good lawyer to figure it out.
And that's actually in the UK, you have that ability to take a tax write-off on your investment into social enterprises, right? Which is both great, but it can also have a weird dampening effect, I gather, from some friends who are in that world. But there's some interesting. I mean, we sort of skirted this a little bit in our conversation. Like, it's really hard to get startup funding for a new co-op.
Yeah.
Right? Because even the existing financial institutions that themselves are co-op, right? Co-ops, whether they are credit unions, all of whom are cooperatives, or the National Co-op Bank.
Yeah.
They don't know how to underwrite platform co-ops, for example, to loop back to that for a minute.
Yeah.
And that's why our friends at Drivers Co-op, for example, have such a hard time raising capital. Or if you want to create a new co-op that's not a brick and mortar thing, or it's not in one of the better known sort of asset classes or domains that have had co-ops for a long time, these financial institutions just don't know what to do with you. And I think that continues to be a challenge.
It's a major challenge, and I was writing about this and working on this for a while, and I don't think we cracked it. But yeah, I mean, what sort of private equity and venture capital is very good at is very risky, capital to buy big things. In the co-op world, the oversimplified version, because I know we're almost at time, is like the members generally own the equity of the co-op, right? Like they each own a share. You own a share of REI. So the equity is owned by the members. So most of what's available is debt, and debt tends to be more conservative, less risk tolerant. And so bringing in sort of that early capital is hard. And so what tends to happen is you need to sort of prove it out with just a little bit of member equity, maybe a little bit of like actual sales. And then if you can prove it out, you often can find funding, but it's a harder path for sure.
It's way harder. Well, we could clearly keep talking for some time. This has been so rich. I love it. We may have to do this again in the fall and follow up on some of these topics. But this has been a lot of fun, Greg. Thank you so much for being the last of the first season. I'm just endlessly fascinated with how we sort of the nitty-gritty of how we help innovative entrepreneurs build these successful businesses. And I think every time I have a conversation like this, it's just genuinely hard. So if you're an entrepreneur and you want to build a co-op, get yourself to Greg's programming. And also, if it feels hard, it's probably because it is.
Well, Astrid, thank you. No, look, it's hard to do anything new, and so I think we're all aware of the problems, but building a better solution is challenging, and so it's hard. And so kudos to folks that are taking it on, and whether you succeed or not, we need people to try to build new models.
Yeah, 100%. Well, thanks so much. I think we'll leave it at that. We'll do the usual follow-up with my write-up on Substack and getting the recording out on YouTube in due course. But thanks so much, and have a lovely 4th of July weekend.
Lovely to see you. Thank you, Astrid. It's so good to see you.
This was great. Take care.
Bye.
Bye now.